Angels Care Home Health, serving Hayes and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare-certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
I would recommend Angel Care to anybody. They have really helped me regain my strength.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible. Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.
I couldn't have survived this without Angels Care.
Eagle Community Television presents Community Connection with your host, Mike Cooper.
Hello and welcome again to Community Connection from Eagle Community Television. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our producer, Jeff Durall. We're at Fort Hays State University Sternberg Museum of Natural History at Sternberg Drive in Hays, and actually we are in the Eugene Fleahardy Range Room, some of the research facilities behind the scenes of the Sternberg Museum, with the Zoological Collections Manager, Curtis Schmidt. And we wanted to talk about Curtis's project that's coming up this spring and summer for 3 years, along with Dr. Elmer Fink, wildlife biologist at Fort Hays State University as well. They have received a 3-year grant, and that grant is for a study. And that's the reason we wanted to talk to Curtis, was to find out about this study. First of all, Curtis, what are you going to be studying?
Well, we are studying a species of bat known as the northern long-eared bat. It's a bat that's really not that common in the state of Kansas, but has a very wide geographic range. This is of particular interest because it occurs in the state and we don't know a whole lot about it. It has recently, in fact, just the beginning of the month, on April 2nd, the federals listed it as threatened. So it's a federally threatened species now, basically due to the white nose fungus that's killing it throughout most of its range. So this is a, as I said, very wide-ranging species found throughout all of the eastern U.S., so from Kansas all the way east, north into much of Canada. It's a very, very wide-ranging species, and throughout most of eastern United States, it's getting completely wiped out by this disease.
What is the habitat of the northern long-eared bat?
You know, in Kansas, we don't really know, and that's part of this study. We set out to study this because we essentially know nothing other than the fact where it might occur and where it's known to occur in the state. So we don't know where it roosts. We know it's primarily a tree roosting bat. In the east, the reason why it's being killed is because they hibernate. They're hibernating bats, and they hibernate in caves. And when these caves get infected with the white nose syndrome, that's when they become, that's basically when they die and they get wiped out.
So this is a fatal disease for these
very,
bats.
Very fatal. When it shows up in caves, any of the species that hang out in those caves and hibernate there, basically they're doomed.
So the lack of caves in Kansas means that the bat is not necessarily at risk for this disease then in Kansas.
Right, and that's a very good thing. That's part of the reason we set out to do this study, is because we don't have caves in Kansas. I mean, obviously we do in some areas, but in the areas that this species occurs, there are not any known caves. So we hypothesize that they're using something else to hibernate. So as the species is getting wiped out throughout a lot of its range, Kansas could potentially be a safe harbor for the species, because we don't think that white nose will make it this far west.
Let's go back for just a moment to the term that you used, the federally threatened term. We've heard of endangered, threatened, and so forth. Talk about the distinction there, would you, Curtis?
Endangered basically means they are in danger of becoming extinct. So in the foreseeable future, they probably will become extinct. Threatened is one step down from that, where they're not quite at that level, but they're threatened with becoming endangered. Does that make sense? So not quite there yet, but getting there. It's basically saying we need to watch out for this. We need to start protecting it before it becomes endangered.
It's a warning flag, isn't it?
It's a warning flag, absolutely.
Well, now this federally threatened designation, which occurred in early April, as you mentioned, Curtis, is really good news for you and Dr. Fink, isn't it?
It's great news for us, and honestly, it's great news for everybody in Kansas because the species will not be regulated as much as it would if it were an endangered species. It'd be very problematic if it were endangered because we're not sure what exact type of habitat they utilize. And they have to set aside some type of critical habitat that the state or the feds come up with critical habitat. And basically that's trees. So what they had deemed critical habitat at this point is trees with a diameter of 3 inches or more. So you can imagine that's a lot of trees. If all of that were regulated, which would probably happen if it were an endangered species, our hands would be tied to doing a lot of different things, you know, widening highways. Anything that involves removing trees would be highly regulated. And since it's threatened and not endangered, those regulations are simply not going to be there, which is good because they don't need to be in this area.
The grant, 3 years, comes through what agency?
It's actually federal funding through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that is given to the state. So it's given to the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. And then they grant us and they contract us to do the work. So it's basically through the state wildlife grants, that program, and that's where the money comes from.
And you're actually going to be able to involve some of the Fort Hays State students involved in this work, aren't you?
Absolutely. They're actually going to be the ones that do most of the work, which is great for Dr. Fink and I. We are the principal investigators, so we're overseeing the project, but the students are actually going to be the ones out doing the research. We currently have 3 graduate students, actually from 3 different states, one from California, one from Missouri, and one from Texas, who are going to be heading the different aspects of the project. So, and hopefully they can hire undergraduates to help them as well to get some research experience.
And I would assume that after this 3-year study has taken place, there'll be published findings of the results.
Absolutely, yes. There's going to be reports for the state. Actually, we have to do that quarterly. So we have to do that several times.
The bats themselves, the northern long-eared bats, have actually been found on campus as early as the 60s and 70s, haven't they?
Yes, that's one of the neat things about this species is they do occur right here. So we can essentially start our research in our own backyard. As you mentioned, a bunch of specimens from the 60s and 70s came from bats that were roosting in some of the buildings on campus. We have no evidence that that continues today, but that's something we will look into. We do have recent specimens that we have captured up along the Saline River. We think that they might be hibernating in some of the bluffs up there, the big limestone bluffs. But they do spread out, obviously. You know, when they're done hibernating, they spread out. They come into town, basically wherever there's trees and agriculture, which produces lots of insects for them to eat. So they spread out, and, you know, it's great that we can start in our own backyard.
Matter of fact, that first discovery, which was made here locally, you had a part in that. Tell us that story, would you?
Oh, one of the recent discoveries that we had was Mike Korn, that works for the Hays Daily
Reporter
News.
for the Hays Daily News.
Right, he came out to interview me to talk about the project, and, you know, we did that, and he left, and not 30 minutes after he left, he called me back and said he had found a bat over at the Centennial Mall, in the Centennial Plaza. And yeah, I get those calls all the time. There's big brown bats and other species of bats that are very common, and people find them all the time. So I went to check it out, and lo and behold, it happened to be a northern long-eared bat. And he was just tickled pink. He got great photographs of it, and we actually have the specimen alive upstairs still.
But the brown bats are the most prolific, I guess, in the area, right?
Yeah, they're definitely, when people think of bats in this area, that's what they think of, because they're the ones that use human structures to roost. That's the bats you're going to have in your attic, you know, in the store. There's a good population over on campus. So when people run across bats, they're usually a big brown bat.
Matter of fact, our producer, Jeff Durall, told us the story about discovery when he was young of a bat and was rescued by a member of the Fort Hays State faculty, as a matter of fact. But they're certainly not anything to be feared, are they? I mean, bats are very important for the
Not
ecology.
at all. They, as you mentioned, they are very, very beneficial. What they do to agriculture is just amazing because of the number of insects and pests that they consume. If bats disappeared from the area, we would definitely be overrun with pests, and agriculture would take a major hit. So the millions upon millions of insects that they eat every single night. And bats are very common. Most people don't know that, but there's 17 species of bats in Kansas. Some are migratory, just like birds. They just migrate through the area. Others stay here the whole time. But they are very, very common. And when there's that many bats out at night feeding on that many insects, it can have a very, very beneficial result.
And most of they are nocturnal
Right.
species, so we very rarely get a chance to encounter them. But certainly for insects, mosquitoes, things like that, certainly a very important part of our ecology.
Absolutely.
I wanted to show this book that Curtis had a part in along with Dr. Jerry Choate and Dale Sparks. It's called Bats of Kansas. It's available at Excavations, which is the bookstore here at Sternberg Museum. It is a book that you might think would be a publication for the scientific community, but that's not the case, is it? You've had some really good response from young people as well as adults on this.
Yeah, we wrote this just as a general guide for basically people that know next to nothing about bats. You know, it gives you a good idea of what bats occur in the area, where in the state they occur, and some of the ecology and how to identify them as well. So we tried to keep the science down, but it's useful for anyone from scientists to grade school kids. And we get an excellent response from all age groups.
An all-inclusive book, believe me. If you'd like a copy, Excavations here at Sternberg has it. And one of the questions that stood out for me that I wanted to ask Curtis about, since this is kind of a thing of Sternberg, are there any fossil bats from Kansas?
Oh gosh, you're asking the wrong guy, but I would probably say not. Because, you know, when we think of fossils in Kansas, we think of an ocean. Marine mammals and marine things like that. I haven't heard of any from Kansas, simply because we were a giant ocean back then.
How about worldwide and in the United States? How prolific, how widespread is bat population?
Bats, I believe, are found on every continent except Antarctica. They are global. One of the most interesting things is, second to rodents, they are the most diverse group of mammals out there. So just hundreds of thousands of species of bats.
This northern long-eared bat, Jeff is going to put the display that you've captured of the live bat here at Sternberg into our interview today. What should we be looking for when we see this bat?
One of the first things you'll notice is it's very small. It's one of the smallest bat species that we have. The name long-eared is kind of a misnomer because a lot of other bats have much longer ears. But the group that this one belongs to, which are called the Myotis, basically the mouse-like bats, is where Myotis comes from. It has very long ears compared to the rest of that group. And if you fold the ears over, the tip of the ears is well beyond the tip of the nose. So although the ears may not look huge for that group, they certainly are.
But due to the size of the bat itself, the small ears do stand
very
out
small
there.
bat.
So then you hope to accomplish what with the study in our final moment, Curtis?
There's several questions that we're looking at. First and foremost is, where do they hibernate? Obviously, because of the white nose syndrome that's knocking out a lot of the hibernacula further east in their range, we want to know what they're using in Kansas specifically, so that we can monitor, you know, if that disease comes into Kansas and where, we can kind of monitor that. But as I mentioned, we know next to nothing about this species. So where and how far do they disperse from hibernacula? What types of habitats do they use when they're raising young? So the maternity colonies, where are they? Foraging habits, basically anything that we can ecologically, because we know next to nothing.
And the more we can learn about different species, all species of bats included, the more we can understand how they fit into our overall ecology and the support that we can give them for protection.
Right, absolutely. And since this one is threatened within most of its range, it'd be good to know that it's got a safe harbor here in Kansas, potentially.
Curtis Schmidt, Zoological Collections Manager from the Sternberg Museum of Natural History, our community connection. Thanks for watching.
Angels Care Home Health, serving Hayes and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
There's not any words to describe their kindness.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible. Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.
They saved my life.